Well, welcome. It's time for another yard food session. I am your hostess here today. I'm Tess Hoke. I'm a garden educator and real food mentor. And I call what I do yard food. I grow food in my yard and I teach plant lovers just like you how to do it too. So today's yard food session is all about loving up our soil love. How can we feed our garden soils easily and productively? How can we create bountiful soil so that we get the return on the other end at harvest season that we're hoping for? So I've got some fun little ideas I'm excited to share with you here today to get us off on some really good feet. But before we do that, shout out to you. I just want to thank you for your enthusiasm and your commitment to learning how to grow food. It really is super cool. So it inspires me to be here as an educator, to do my best for you, to share with you what I know so that you can learn, practice it, and share this with everybody that you love. And if it adds value to your life, consider donating for my class today. It's how I'm supporting myself in this world and allows me to continue doing what I do for you. So, as we get started here today, as we learn some things about our soil, how we can really change our gardening game by attending to some soil needs, I want to share with you something that my grandma taught me a long time ago. I was out in the garden with her and I said to her one time, "Grams, what's the difference between dirt and soil?" And she said, "Honey, dirt is what you get on your clothes and you have to wash out with soap and water. Soil is the creation of the gods." You know, it took me a long time to really understand what my grandmother was referring to. My instructor in junior high in physical science taught me about soil, that soil is a product of evolution, that when the earth was being formed and lava fields were everywhere and stone and rock, that the wind and the rain wore that down, and over eons of time, along with the minerals of the planet, it deteriorated and life forms were blown in by the water and on the rain, and all of that together mixed up and became soil, and soil became the necessary layer in order for plant life to grow. Now that was good information, but it really didn't do for me what my grandmother did, and that was I needed to learn to become one with the soil. I needed to learn to attend to it as another living creature in the garden. And once I began to understand that, my success in the garden boosted. I mean, I was gathering harvest from my garden in ways that I was never able to do so before. And so that's what I'm super excited to share with you here is how we can simply and easily add to our soil by giving our soil what it's asking from us, how to know what that is, and how to source all of those products out by what simply is around us. It doesn't have to be hard or technical or even scientific if we don't choose to go down that road. It can be super simple, and that's why I'm excited to be here today and share some of those ideas with you. So garden soil. First, let me just say, I've been invited by a dear friend of mine, our moderator here today, to do a little work in some of her brand new garden beds. So super cool, and I'm really grateful for that. And I'm going to be able to do some of this stuff to start some of this soil off for her and as well give you some ideas. But soil, regular garden soil, if you and I were to look in it under a magical microscope, we would see literally in a teaspoon of rich garden soil billions, and I mean billions, of microscopic life forms. And all of those life forms are living and breeding and dying and decomposing all on their own without anything from me, without me having to even understand what their life is all about. But I can. And one of the things that I can do is understand that I, as a gardener, have one job in the garden. One simple little job. That's what my grandmother was referring to. Her job was the same. I am the caregiver in the garden. I am the bringer of food and the bringer of water. Everybody else knows exactly what their job in the garden is. So all those microbials living inside of a small little bit of soil are what really are occupying everything beneath our feet. Soil is magical that way. One species, I don't need to know their name, of microscopic microbial life forms, they may be partying, while another variety is dying. The food that one is consuming and the waste that they give off could be food for another. But one thing I do know for certain, everything in that soil structure is connected. I don't need to know how necessarily. I just need to know that it's all connected. It's a symbiotic relationship between all living things within the soil. There is another layer of living material on top of that microscopic level. It's the bigger life forces, things like worms, earthworms, and grubs, and other bugs. I don't need to know their names necessarily, but they too are living their life cycle. They are feeding on what they find in the soil. They are leaving behind their waste. Their waste becomes the food for the microbial activity beneath them. Above that, there is another level of life forms, things that we tend to cringe at, moles and voles and tiny little mammals that they themselves are burrowing through the soil looking for food, leaving behind their waste. That waste becomes the food for the earthworms, and on that cycle goes. But again, my job in the garden is the caregiver. If I wish to cultivate that relationship that's going on in the soil, I have one simple job. I need to bring food and water to the soil. So let's look at some simple, super simple ways that I can do that without a whole lot of effort, without having to get in a truck and go down the road and bring in a lot of organic material into my garden. I can simply do it with what I have around. Now, having said that, it has behooved me many times over the years to make friends with farmers. Because what do farmers often have? They have an abundance of manure. And manure is loved by soil microbes. So if you have something on your own little farm or your property or in your backyard garden, things like rabbits or goats or sheep or cows or horses, all of that waste material is golden for the garden. If you don't, and you have some friends or you want to make acquaintances with farmers, then go to their place and get some of that. Not necessarily necessary, but it's a great place to start. I have some compost here today, some organic manure that I took out of my chicken house yesterday. I made this myself by adding to the chickens. Well, I didn't do the manure part, they did, but I added some hay throughout the last season, all through the fall and through the winter. And those chickens, they went potty on top of my hay. It got mixed up because that's what chickens do. And months later, I got this incredible organic material that I know this soil is gonna love. Now, one of the questions I often get asked about adding manure or compost to a growing bed is, how much should I put in the soil? And one of the things that I like to say is add more than you think. The soil really consumes organic material. It eats it up and it turns it into the correct and the appropriate soil structure, let's call it, for plant life to emerge and grow and thrive. The microbials and all of that soil structure is going to do that all for me. I don't have to have any particular recipe, but I know that I need to add organic material. So here I do, and we're going to use a little bitty corner here, and we are going to just work it in. You can see I've got a nice little pile, and we're just going to pretend that this is our little bed. I've got a lot here, and I'm just going to work that into the soil. Kind of like I'm doing, I don't know, muffin batter or something. But just turn it under, work it in, and there I have it. Now, if you're adding manure to your soil, excuse me, if you're adding manure to your soil, or you are adding compost to your soil, a rule of thumb that I like to follow is to just give it a few days to sort of mellow in and work into that soil before I plant directly in it. That gives an opportunity for all of those microbes that are there to begin to work that soil and begin to occupy it and make it home. And if my soil was lean and I don't have a lot of microbial activity in that soil, then chances are I've just added some of that to the soil by this manure product. It's in there. It's part of the natural structure of what happens out there in the farmlands, in the manure pile. And so I've just added some microbial life to my soil. Here's another idea. If you're not, if you don't have access to manure, and if you're not a composter, you don't have big piles of compost in your garden, think about this for an idea. One of the things that many of us share together is that we're coffee drinkers. And I'm a coffee drinker too. And I like to add coffee grounds to my garden beds. If I'm going to be planting, let's use a little example here. These are some kale starts. If I'm going to be planting some kale in my garden here, in this bed, it's a few days later, this compost has worked in, and I'm going to be planting my little fellows here, let's say. I've got coffee grounds. I accumulate those every single day of my life. And I can simply come up with some coffee grounds. I've got the coffee papers here as well. These are, I'm not worried about them. They're gonna decompose, but I can simply come up to my garden bed and dig a hole and bury that and cover it right over. Wow, super simple and super positive. And here's what happens. I've now put some organic material under my soil, and every earthworm in my little neighborhood and all of the microbes are going to begin to compost that and turn that into soil structure. It works really well. Another thing that works just as well as coffee grounds are food scraps. Now, when you use food scraps, you need to think kind of, just be wary about one thing. We have mice that are often issues, and sometimes rats and little guys like that that are looking for lunch just like you and I are looking for lunch. So always make sure that if you are going to take your food scraps up to your vegetable garden, that you never include meat products. Always put those aside and do something different with them. But that peanut butter sandwich that got dropped on the ground and nobody wanted to eat, or that leftover pasta that was so delicious, but you know, everybody forgot it in the corner of the refrigerator. Whatever it is that you come up with food scrap wise that you're not composting in some other way, go ahead, honest, and bury them just like I did here with the coffee grounds. A simple deep hole buried next to any vegetable crop or in the corner of your grow bed. Dig it, bury those food scraps, and cover it over. Again, the soil microbes will know what to do with that. The earthworms will come in and begin to compost that, and you will begin to build really incredible, rich soil structure. It works every time. I can't believe how simple this idea is and how underutilized it is. Everything that's organic in nature in our lives, coming out of our kitchen, coming out of our yards, can easily be buried in some portion of our vegetable rows to continue its cycle to decompose. It really does work. So think about that and consider that the next time you're wondering what to add to your bed. Compost is incredible. Use it. Use a lot of it. Work it into your soil and make sure that it's constant. Manures work, and again, these food scraps or coffee grounds that you have access to are wonderful additives to your soil. One of the questions that I often get asked is, well, how does that change the pH of the soil? Or what does that do to all of the other elements that might be a part of perfect pH soil structure? Well, the good news is I can tell you I'm not a scientist and I don't necessarily need to have those answers. What blows my mind about soil is soil, given itself an ability and time to do its thing, it will create the perfect pH in your soil. It knows what it's doing. I don't have to be the scientist on board. Just like my grandma taught me, feed the garden, it will do the rest for you. And I've listened to those words, I've practiced those words, and those words work. So if that sounds like something that's ringing a bell for you, try it. It might really blow your mind. It might really show you what's possible in the vegetable row without having to rely on products and additives that are coming from outside of your backyard space. So that's one little hint that I want to give you. I'm just going to take our little guy back here because we've got some other projects with him. But I have another idea for you. Let's say that you've got a garden bed that you want to grow the soil in this year. Or let's say that you've got a bed that you just need to really boost that soil up. One of the things that I like to plant are potatoes. And here's a very simple way of planting a potato while growing the soil in your bed this year. Potatoes where I live are amazing. They grow well. One of the rules of thumb for potato planting in my area is when the dandelions are blooming, it's time to plant your potatoes. And when I look out into my yard, all I see are dandelions blooming. So that's my signal, girl, it's time to get on it and plant potatoes. Which is what excites me about this particular area today, because you can see we're going to work on growing the soil. We want to fill this with soil as time goes by. So here's a simple way to use potatoes, not only to get a crop later on, but to build the soil along the way. So I'm going to take my little potato, my little seed potato, and I'm going to plant him. And then I'm going to let him do his thing, and he will sprout, and he'll come up. And as he begins to grow, one of the keys to growing really yummy potatoes and getting a lot of them is to mound up that potato stem as it grows. As my little potato is growing and he's getting taller and taller, if I either, one, mound up the soil, but I don't have soil, or I mound up some organic material around that growing stem, then what I've done for my potato is I've covered the stem and allowed that potato the ability to produce even more potatoes for me, because everywhere that stem is covered, he'll send out a little lateral root and form potatoes. So I'll have potatoes here, and if I cover the stem some more and it grows up, I'll have more potatoes. But what can I cover that stem with if I'm lacking in soil, if I'm working on building the soil? And here's a product that you can use easily. You can get some rotting organic hay. And I say organic because a lot of times really nasty chemicals get sprayed on fields, and we don't want that coming into your garden. That's a good thing to remember. If you're bringing in organic material, straw, hay, leaves, grass clippings, make sure, give a little thought, is there any toxic chemicals that were used in the production of that material? You would be surprised how often there is. So do me a favor for your sake and your health, and always just keep that question in the back of your mind. What was used in the production of that material? Because that's what's going into my soil, and then that's what's going into my body. So we want to make sure that you stay super clean. But back to that potato that's growing up. His little stem is growing up, and I want to cover that stem so that I get even more potatoes forming on his vine. I'm just simply going to take some organic rotting hay or straw or whatever I've got, and I'm going to cover the stem just like that. And he'll grow taller, and I'm going to do it again. And I'm just going to be building up along that stem, covering that stem while I leave the green leaves at the top, but covering along a lot of that stem with organic material. And what will happen over the course of my growing season is my potato will form lots of potatoes under here, but as time goes by, this will begin its decomposition process. This too will begin to decompose and form soil. Those soil microbes and those earthworms that are beginning to come into my soil will then start to feast upon all of this organic material. And by next year, all of that I had built up along the stems of my potatoes will now be rotting down into my soil bed. I'll harvest those potatoes in the fall. I will leave behind all of that organic material that I used, and over the winter and into the following spring, this will decompose and build my soil structure even higher. So think about how you can use that mounding idea with organic material to continue to build your soil. Let's use that simple little mounding idea one step further. And this is one of my favorite things that I love to teach students. It's called the lasagna soil building technique. It's got a lot of other names and has been used in many places around the globe to successfully build soil where soil is maybe not so good. So there's some organic materials that we're going to use for that. Again, many of them are found right around you. Okay, so our goal is to fill this bed with soil, right? But we don't have soil to do that with, so we're gonna make it. Here's how we're gonna do it. We're gonna start by building, like you would in your kitchen, a lasagna effect of organic materials. We're gonna put them together in a very specific way so that they function and that they all work together to decompose over time and make that soil that we are hoping for. And bringing in microbials and worms along the way to finish the process off. So, I've got this grow bed here with soil underneath, and I'm gonna start with some things that you and I can easily come up with, and that is newspaper. I'm gonna just lay some newspaper down, and I'm doing this because I'm covering the soil underneath this. I'm making sure that if there's any weeds or anything that's growing under there, I'm gonna sort of squelch them down and give myself a head start as I build this soil. So I've got a little layer of newspaper. We can find newspaper, it's easy to do. Recycle centers, my mailbox, wherever I can find it, newspaper is an easy one to do. So I'll start with that, and then I'm going back to this organic hay that I've got. So again, this is a good thing. If you see any around, if you know any farmer friends, try to just gather a few pieces because it comes in handy in so many ways. So the first layer is about a 4-inch little wedge of hay. And I'm just gonna lay it down there. This is alfalfa hay, which means that alfalfa was cut. Alfalfa has some nitrogen in it, so that's a good idea for my garden bed. I've got about a 4-inch layer. I'm going to take some compost tea that I made. Now this was actually some manure tea, but what I'm using this for, compost tea works as well, is it's going to begin to add nitrogen to this hay, which is going to need something to sort of boost it, kickstart it into decomposition. And that little manure tea is just going to add some high nitrogen to this brown material, it's called, and begin its decomposition. Now that's an interesting thing about making compost is there's like 2 ingredients, green material and brown material. Green material meaning something that's high in nitrogen, brown material meaning something that's high in carbon. And you add the 2 together and decomposition begins. That's really all we have to understand about this pile. So I've got brown material, this, and I've just put on some compost tea, and we're gonna call that green material. The next thing I'm going to do is take some of this compost that I have, and I'm going to put a layer right on top. And I'm gonna put about a 4-inch layer of compost right on top of this. Okay, I'm gonna water that in because I wanna make sure that I keep this at a nice moist level. This is gonna really expose itself here in just a minute. So we've got some compost. Then what I'm going to do is continue to layer that as I go. But I'm going to add one more fun thing in the middle here. I'm going to add some red wiggler worms. Now, red wiggler worms are compost worms. They are really going to kickstart this and begin to biodegrade this down, to consume this organic material and, sort of make quick work of this. This is going to take me this season. Next season, this is going to be soil that I'm going to be able to plant in. We're going to be able to plant in it this year as well. But this is an easy way to begin to build soil in places where we don't have it. So I've got some earthworms there, red wiggler worms, and I'm going to apply yet another layer, little mat of my organic hay. I'm going to apply another little bit. Compost tea, just like this was spaghetti sauce on my lasagnas. Got to get the flavor somewhere, right? And I'm going to put another layer of compost. Okay, make that simple. And we're going to give it some water. Ooh, it's looking good. Okay, and while we're at it, let's give it some more worms, should we? These guys are going to be super happy. They've been growing in a worm bin all winter long. They've been reproducing and loving their life. And now we're going to really give it to them. Okay, let's add yet one final layer of organic hay here. Let's add that on. Can you see this lasagna way starting to form itself? And on top of this, instead of adding compost this time, I've made some really yummy, more topsoil-like. It started with a lot of compost, and I took some yummy soil out of my grow bed earlier because I'm gonna plant in this part. So let's add a layer of topsoil right on top of this. Now you can begin to see that this would be really super simple to just do chunk by chunk by chunk as I'm doing my best to fill up this garden bed. This is going to decompose, like I said, over the course of time. And it's eventually, probably next season, just gonna slough into composted soil. And that's my goal. So this season, I'm just sort of constructing this pile of yum. I'm going to be able to plant in it, and I'll show you that in a second. And I'm going to keep it all together. Okay, there's that. Let's give it a little hit of water. Okay, so we've got the necessary ingredients for composting to go on, right? We got brown material, we've got green material. Brown material being the hay, green material, nitrogen, meaning the compost, and the compost tea that I've added in there. We've layered that. We've put worms in that so that they can continue and really amplify and boost and accelerate this decomposition process. And then we've topped this with some really yummy, growable soil. To that, I'm going to now plant my little fellows, my little kale starts. You can plant anything in this because as this begins to decompose and the roots of these things begin to seep down, everybody will all just work together. Okay, that's a simple way. One of the things that I love to do with a pile like this, because they're kind of, they'll be a little bit wobbly. They may not be beautiful, but they are effective, I'll give you that. One of the things that I love to do with something like this is plant my squash on top of it, because as those squash leaves grow and cover this area, it just begins to become a big mound of organic material, decomposing, and it decomposes in a way that the vegetable starts are happy with. It doesn't get too hot so that everything gets hot and burns the plant roots. Everybody just works fine. It's an amazing, simple little lasagna method to build the soil. So this year we're getting two things done at the same time. We're building soil and we're growing a vegetable crop so that we can get a harvest at the end. Win-win, my favorite way of gardening. So we can do another one here, and like I said, chunk by chunk we could fill the bed. An easy way to do this as well is to get a cardboard box. Cardboard is incredible in the garden. It decomposes. It houses, all sorts of great little things. Let's do this again in this box. I'll do this again so we can see it one more time, and then we can actually take this box and put it anywhere in our garden spaces. It doesn't have to be in this spot, but it's a really simple idea. It might work for you. So again, we started this with newspaper. I don't need newspaper because I've got the box. We'll put this, a little pad of organic hay in the bottom. It fits perfectly. We'll give it a little compost tea. If I was a microbe, I would just be in heaven. And here, I've got the rest of my coffee grounds. I'm gonna put them in the bottom here. Just gonna spread those out, and I'm gonna offer the microbes gods something yummy. I'm going to give this a little bit of water. And I'm going to give it a layer of compost. This is going to activate and start this whole thing off. Let's give it a little bit more water. We want to make sure that each layer is sort of the consistency of a wrung out sponge. Not too wet, but wet enough. Let's give it another 4-inch or so layer of beautiful hay. It's on its way to rot. Let's give it a dose of something green so that decomposition begins. Food for the microbes. Let's give it a layer of compost. Let's give that a little bit of moisture. Woo, look at us go. Let's do one final little hit of hay just to build it up a little bit more, because this is all going to turn to soil. And let's cover this with some of my topsoil that I made by taking some compost and adding some of my garden soil to it, because I know that that garden soil had some microbes in it. So I'm sort of seeding my little project. And we'll just put some there. We're gonna try to do maybe a 3 or 4-inch layer. We wanna make sure that we put enough on top so that our little seedlings can get their roots in there. I'm not too worried about their roots going way deep, because that's gonna take time, and as that time passes, my little pile of organic material is gonna begin to break down and be hospitable to my plant life. We're gonna give that a little bit of water. And we're gonna plant some more little kale babies. Hi, little fellows. Your new home. Now this is a really creative, I didn't come up with this, This has been used for many, many, many years by lots of different gardeners in lots of different ways. But it sure sort of sparks your creative sense here, gives you some ideas on how you could create grow spaces if you didn't have the soil. And if you have a garden bed, but your soil is poor, or your grow beds need to be boosted with more soil, this is a really simple, creative way to do it. And then that's it. All you need to do is water it and grow. And over the course of time, this will continue to biodegrade, to break down. The microbes and the worms will begin to turn that into soil. How does that happen? I don't have to know the specifics. What I have to do is know that my specific job is to feed the garden. I am the bringer of organic material. And this is a very simple way to make that happen. How do we know our garden soil is doing well? How do I know that I've got the right pH, let's say? How do I know I have enough nitrogen in my soil, or phosphorus, or potassium? How do I know all of that? Do I need to know all that? And here's what I would like to encourage us to do. As our garden careers continue, as we begin to spend more and more time in our vegetable gardens and achieve the goals that we've set out for ourselves, namely, if you're here with me today, that's probably to grow some of your food. And so our job is to pay attention, to start to witness what is going on in our gardens. I've planted a crop, let's say, and it just isn't vibrant. It just never produces. It doesn't get as big as my neighbor's crop, for example. What am I doing wrong? And I just want to bring that back again to something very simple. We as gardeners are part of the web of life. There is this complex system that exists within the garden, whether it be in the soil, or in the plant life above that soil, or in the trees, or the birds, or the insect population. Our job really, our success comes when we can spend time there and just witness it. And here's what I mean by that. So often in our modern world, you know, days get busy, our phones are ringing, and our to-do lists are ever long. And sometimes we just can't get it out of our heads. And I've really, in my own garden experience, really learned, and I think this is partly what my grandmother was alluding to, is when I can leave all of that at the garden gate, when I can just set that down, and my time in the garden is quiet. It's quiet for a reason, because I am part of the structure too. I am one string in the web of life that exists in the garden. And everything there in the garden is a symbiotic relationship, one with another. We're going to say thank you for your willingness and your excitement to grow your food. It truly changes the trajectory of everything. It changes the future of your and my everything. With that, friend, you take care. You have a great garden day. You have a great garden season. Lots more yard food sessions coming up. I look forward to seeing you again. Bye-bye.